Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to take a deep dive first look at 1914 Deluxe, Hell Unleashed, designed by Mike Nagel and published by War Diary Publications. This is a two-player game where one player plays the Axis, one player plays the Allies, and it covers the opening salvos of World War I. As the German player, you're trying to get a quick knockout of France. The Allied player is trying to prevent that. Before we jump in and take a look at the components, I do want to mention that this game's roots are the original 1914 game from Avalon Hill, published in 1968 and designed by James Dunnigan. Mike Nagel, the designer for this game, has kept the most of the rules intact for this, rewritten some of them for clarity and things like that, tweaked some of the mechanics, redone the map and counters, but this is the direct descendant of the 1968-1914 game from Avalon Hill. To summarize the general overview of this game starts in the middle of August, and it can run until the end of October, although the standard game runs right up until the beginning of October, about 10 to 12 turns. And units are corps size, division size. There are some brigades in here. Each turn is 2 days. And relatively large map, as we'll see, that spans from the western side of Germany to a few hundred miles past Paris on the west side. But we'll take a deeper look at all of this and talk about the game complexity as we look at the components inside. As we open up the box here, I do want to also mention that this version of the game, which is the boxed version, fully boxed version, published version by War Diary Publications, is new as of March-April of 2023. So before that, it was some form of kind of print and play or special order type of game that was before that, but now it's a fully boxed version available for War Diary Publication, from War Diary Publications. We have a six-sided die in here for resolving combat and other game functions. Let's take a quick look at the rule book. 20 pages in all. There's some promotional material for War Diary's excellent magazine. If you like wargaming magazines, I'd highly recommend you take a look at that. There'll be a link down below to more information on there too, but it's an excellent magazine. I've seen one of the copies of them. It's really, really good. Some promotional material for Guadalcanal in the back here, designer notes. Then we have some kind of significant optional rules here. I think that really change up gameplay. We'll talk a little bit about those as we go forward. But the core rules then end with the kind of the victory conditions here on page 16. The front page is to print there, so 2 to 16. So we're talking 15 pages of rules. And if we look at them here, very standard layout. There's got some graphics to enhance some of the explanations in various places. There's movement example and a combat example. There is not a full example of play, but I think most of the mechanics are going to feel familiar to someone who has played Hex Encounters war games before. The game box mentions a moderate complexity. I feel like that's a very fair estimation of it. If I were going to use my 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being, again, advanced squad leader, I would probably say that this is a 4 out of 10. I've still got some lingering questions. I've made a pass through the rules now. I do have a few lingering questions on supply, on stacking in particular there, and then that kind of how the mobilization and setup works, but I think those are going to be cleared up as I make a second pass through the rules. So yeah, I think a 4 out of 10 feels pretty good, and I will talk a little bit about some of the mechanics that I'd like to highlight as we look at the components, look at the units, and look at the cards as well. Let's jump now into taking a look at our units. A few of these are very eager to play, so I've pulled these out and stepped, kind of set them aside here. Oh, we've got some more counters here that are ready to go. These are nice, thick, laser cut counters, so they've got a really sharp feel to them. I don't even think, though they've got the angular edges, these aren't ones that I'm going to be clipping, just because they feel really kind of solid. I really like these thick wooden counters that come with the laser cuts. They feel really, really cool. So units here, we're looking at, we have three counter sheets. The right-hand side here, actually, this is probably a good time to talk about one of the optional rules, because the game in and of itself plays, Axis side goes through their entire sequence of play, then the Allied side goes through their entire sequence of play. So it's very much one player is going to go, the second player is going to kind of react to that in their own half of the turn as you play through turns and alternating sides like that. However, as an optional rule, there is an impulse system, and that's the system that uses these activated counters, as well as on the other side, all of the counters are printed as double-sided. We've got these assault counters here. So these are only used in that optional method of changing the the very standard sequence of play into a more impulse type of sequence of play that's going to change up gameplay quite a bit. Now we'll notice here on the back side of these units, they have this color designation of the arrow with the red arrow pointing up here. By the yellow units, by the way, these are the Belgian units as we look at them. But if we look on the front side here too, this has the more standard unit information. So each unit again has two sides. But if we look at the backside here, we can see this disguised state. And this will, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I think this might work solitaire. There is a significant element of hidden movement in this game that makes me feel like it's going to work best in its full designed two-player mode. So there isn't a solo bot, there isn't a deck of cards to control it in solo style. And this hidden movement feature, there are also dummy units in the game, makes me feel like this is probably not going to be that's a tough thing to recreate as a solitaire player, and there isn't the idea that you can examine other stacks. There's an air component that's simulated in this, and at this stage in the war, the air component was mainly reconnaissance. So what the air unit allows you, it allows you to flip over a few stacks and see what's inside them. But as we look at the units further on, we're going to see that that kind of dummy status and the hidden movement element is a pretty significant portion of it. So if I'm going to rate this game on a solitaire element, I think you're going to have to contend with that a little bit, either play without it as a solitaire player. That's probably the only thing you could really do, or play with the dummy, but then you're going to be knowing what the units are. So I would say this is probably I'm going to give it a 4.5 on a 1 to 10 scale for solitaire compatibility. Certainly playable solitaire, but you will need to work with those hidden units, either taking them out of the game completely, which I think would work pretty well, or kind of working your way around it as you handle them there. I've got a few other markers here. Down here we can see the German railroad markers. That's a way that the Germans can extend, they can build railheads with their special railroad labor units that can extend supply farther into France and the other Western Allied countries. So now let's take a look at the German units here, quite a bit of these, and let's talk a little bit about one of the individual units to give you an idea on how these units function in the game. Let's pick one of these 7, 12, 3 German infantry corps here. The bottom numbers in yellow from left to right are attack value, defense value, very high, World War I, right? Tough to get a good attack off, and then 3, which is the movement value. On the left, in the black bar, you see a small 3 there, and that is basically the unit's ID number. The top numbers, the top left is the class of the unit and the level of the unit. So these corps here actually have 4 levels to them. And the other side, as we looked at it, these are the hidden unit status. So when this A4 unit gets degraded, it's going to go down to the A3. It's still a corps size, but its combat values have been lessened. And then likewise, it's going to go down to A2, which is over here, a 493, and then it's going to go down to the A1, which is here. And then after it hits that A1 system, it's going to go off. So many of these units that you're going to be putting into play have a 4-step system. They take a lot of degradation before they're going to be knocked out of the game. Then in the top right, we have the stacking value of the unit. And the stacking is very unique in this game. I've not seen a game that handles stacking quite in this way. It's very interesting, and I'm not quite sure, I confess, that I fully understand how it works yet. But stacking in a hex is actually unlimited for your side. However, you can attack with 8 stacking factors, and you can defend with 4 stacking factors, and there's limits as to how many stacking factors you can move into a particular hex in a particular turn. So if you want to put a ton of units in there to, I think, for kind of repeated attacks, then you're going to have to sequence that over a number of turns and a number of days in order to build up that force in that hex. And that's a rough evaluation of it, but the stacking limit is unlimited. It takes a while to build up, and then you're limited in attack and defense as to whether you are moving forward and attacking and things. So, some interesting mechanics I think there around stacking, and you can see down here below, we've got some dummy units as well, talking about the hidden movement again. Then at the bottom here, these are the Dutch units, the ones with the white and the red on them. Our last counter sheet, so again, over 500 counters, I think 528 counters in all. These are, we're looking at now the French, of course, the dominant Western Allied force here are the French units, and then the British units are down here in red. So a lot of things going on here, a lot of units, a relatively, again, a medium to medium large game. I think in terms of gameplay length, I don't see estimates of it in any of the materials here. I do get a sense, I'm going to guess 3 to 5 hours to to play the full standard game. And then if you want to play the extended game, which I'll talk about as we look at the map, I think that could take substantially longer, almost going up into that kind of, this is a pretty hefty game if you're going to play the entire campaign. And basically we'll talk about how it works, but the turn movement can extend well past the early parts of October, going all the way through the end of October and adding about 15 more turns to the game. So a lot of things to do here, a lot of things to look at, and again, the counter quality very, very high. Let's jump in now and take a look at our cards. I do want to mention the units also are 5/8 of an inch, so they're not half-inch counters, they're nice big 5/8 of an inch counters as well. Let's jump in now and take a look at our cards. There are two different types, and each side has both sides. So we have a political effect card deck for both the Allied forces and the German forces. Then we have mobilization cards that come up as a result of some of the actions and some of the interactions between these cards. And this is probably a good time to talk about the scenarios in the game. There's one scenario in the game. However, that would be, I think, misrepresenting the variety and depth of gameplay that the game seems to present, because there's two factors that work to make that one scenario game actually a kind of give it a ton of depth and a lot of variety. The first way that happens here is by the political effect cards. So in each game as you start out, before you set up the game, you're going to flip over, each side's going to flip over 3 of these cards, and they're going to have various events on them. And then you're going to see how these cards would interact with each other, and that's going to manipulate the historical context under which World War I started. So some of them might mean like you don't get any British forces here. Some of them might mean the Eastern Front mobilization for Germany is going to be altered from what the German player would like. Some of them are going to cancel each other out and mean that there's no effect. So we can see here things like territorial reserves, Romanian treaty, and we've got a bunch of things in here that really kind of mix up the gameplay. I think this is a fascinating way to add in some kind of alternative history element, but not really dramatically changing the game itself, but just a really fun way to kind of create a ton of variety for what otherwise would be a very standard one scenario startup. Now, I was looking at some of the components from the old 1914 game, and that did seem to be a factor in that game as well, so they've brought that over from that game. This looks really fun. It looks like this could be a way that's really going to shake up the game and make no two games play out the same way. So really excited about that. Now, as a result of some of these political political effect cards, that could require you to use a certain mobilization card, which is going to restrict your setup for either side. So these mobilization cards, as far as I understand it, come as a result of the interaction of these political effect cards. If they match up too, it could say, okay, the Allied side has to use a particular mobilization card instead of one of the other ones. Now, that's one way, these political effect cards is one way the scenario changes. The second way the gameplay changes is through the use of the German Eastern Front mobilization decision. And that's probably best taken a look at here with this combat aid right here, which is all about the East Mobilization Front process. And the basic core of it, there are a couple of steps I'm still not 100% sure of, but the basic idea behind it is, as the German player, you have to cut off a certain number of your units to take care of the Eastern Front in World War I. The more units you allocate to that, the better you're going to look on this East Front mobilization process that happens somewhere after the 3rd or 4th turn in the game. And the result of that process is going to give you either 0 victory points, depends on how that turns out, and some rather detrimental effects here on your Western Front activity, or it can give you as many as 100 victory points and some of the units back. So a big swing here depends on that calculation that the German player is going to make as to how many units they want to push to the East Front, which is just simulated through this die roll process. There's no map for the East Front, there's no actual combat for the East Front. This is just you're pulling off these units, you're going to do some processes there. Again, this process here could also be could be influenced by the political effect cards here too. So even though the German player might dictate a certain level of East Front mobilization, that might get changed by the whims of the political effect cards. So what you can see here is a really kind of cool and original and creative mechanic, I think, to add in some alternative history and some variety to a one scenario game that's going to give it a uniqueness and kind of a freshness, I think, each time you play it. So I really kind of like the looks of this system and how it looks like it's going to interact in gameplay. So these are our player aids, there are 2 of them. They are unique, so it's not one for each player. There are 2 here. We get some battle odds. Standard combat is standard combat odds, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, as you might kind of estimate from a game coming from its 1968 origins. There is some bombardment elements and a bombardment mechanic in here that plays into combat as well. And then these are some of the results here of the political interaction cards charts that lead to some different results where you're also making a die roll. So some of the cards can lead to die rolls on these charts as well. So a lot of fun stuff. And yes, these are the unique results. So for the political effect cards, you cross-reference them when each side picks one. And some of those matchups, if a certain card matches up with a certain card, it's going to give you one of these political interaction alternate effects charts. So not only do you might get the result on the card, you could get a very unique result depending on how they pair up. And you do 3 of those for each game. So again, a lot of kind of effort and kind of, I think, creativity applied to making a game with one scenario play out a lot differently. Let's jump in now and take a look at our maps. So we have 2 22 by 34 inch maps, and I'll try to pull these out and show them. I'll show an overview of them as they go together. You put them together along their butting together the wider ends, so what you end up with for the map, the footprint of the game is 44 inches by 34 inches, and it covers basically the eastern side, the western side of Germany, all the way over to the a few hundred miles past Paris. Now, I couldn't find a map scale on the map here, but doing some kind of Google map math, it looks like each hex is about 10 miles wide, and their physical measurement here, we have 5/8 inch counters and 1 inch hexes. So it should be, it's a pretty easy game, and this is one of the enhancements I think that was made to it, is kind of making the map bigger and redoing the map. This map doesn't look at all like the original 1914 map looked like. And we can see here we're looking at Strasbourg down here, and then working our way over into France. Verdun is here, Metz, and things like that. So a pretty big footprint, but it looks like a manageable game. And again, the German forces are going to be working their way into France and Netherlands and Belgium if they opt to do that. The game victory conditions, by the way, this is probably a good time to mention it. We can see here, here's one around Metz, victory point, there's stars with point values. It's a victory point based game, and there's going to be a number of things that influence the victory conditions. First up is the control of these starred and vital hexes. They're either city hexes or resource hexes, and you're going to calculate those at the end to see who's got more points. If the Germans invade the Netherlands and Belgium as well as France, then the Allied forces get more victory points. The German Eastern Front mobilization can give them victory points if they do really well by kind of allotting a lot of troops over to that. And then lastly, units destroyed influences victory conditions. So a lot of things going on that you can be playing for in terms of trying to influence whether you're going to win the game or not. Now, the only thing I will say about the map is that I find it a little bit challenging, especially on some of these lighter hexes, to delineate the national boundaries. These are kind of a thicker white dotted line, and it works really well, I think, in the forest. But as I get down here, it's a little bit tricky to see. I mean, it's not a big deal, right? You're going to be able to figure it out, and you can follow things along. But that was the only element of the map that I looked at that said, oh, that's a little bit tricky for me to tell. We can also see here there are a lot of railroad motion here. A lot of these dotted lines here are rail hexes, and there's a big strategic movement component and some of the limitations on supply factors that play with the railroad network. And so that's something that both sides have to contend with, keeping your units in supply and then also making sure you're managing that movement and supply along the railroad network to keep everything in supply as well. Now, I do want to kind of point out here, before I look at the other map, I want to just show you the top side here a little bit in the turn record chart. So we can see that it goes all the way over to the end of October and 39 turns. However, if we look back here on the left side of the map, we can see that September 10th here is marked as the last standard game turn. Oh, actually, this might be okay. Okay, now I get it. Good. So the 12th turn here, so September 5th and 6th is the last standard game turn. I'm not sure why that's red. I thought they went together. But so the standard game lasts 12 turns. And at that point, if victory hasn't been decided, gameplay can continue on. You also have the option, if you want to go all the way to an extended game, so assuming Germany doesn't get its early knockout, players can continue on and play in as many as 39 turns to go all the way to the end here. So the standard game, again, is 12 turns, and I would guess, again, probably 3 hours for experienced players and probably 5 or 6 at the outset for players kind of learning the game the first time they go through it. Let's take a look now at the second map here. Again, another 22 by 34 inches. This is the western side of the map. Some player aids, combat results table, bombardment table. So a lot of the player aids repeated here on the map. A lot of space to put things to, so we can see the destroyed combat units are going to go in here. If we look down here, this is, of course, the Paris section as we get further to the west. Here we can see Paris. So nice clean graphics as we get further onto the west here. There are fortifications in the game as well, as one might be able to expect. But it looks like it's going to be, outside of that national boundary level, which it's not, I mean, I can see them fine. It's just a little bit lighter than I'd like. I think it's going to be a really clean game that's going to play on this improved map compared to the 1914 version. This is a paper map, again, so relatively not glossy, very kind of matte finish paper map. So looks like something that you might want to add a larger piece of playtex on, a plexiglass onto to be able to play a little bit if you would like to keep it nice and flat, although I'm sure it's going to flatten out over time as well. And that brings us to the end. 1914 Deluxe. Hell Unleashed from War Diary Publications and designed by Mike Nagel. One of my goals for this upcoming year is to, I've seen a number of comments on the channel saying, I like World War II games, but I'd really like to see you play things like World War I and Napoleonics games. So I do want to bring more World War I games and Napoleonic games to the channel. So I'm really thankful to get a chance to take a look at 1914 Deluxe here from War Diary Publications. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Love to hear your thoughts down below. As always, thanks for watching.